Imagine a man so rich, his caravans stretched for miles. His generosity was a force of nature. But his final journey was to an empty tomb.
In the 14th century, a great darkness had fallen over Europe. The continent was consumed by the Black Death, a brutal plague that wiped out a third of the population. Famine was widespread, and the feudal kingdoms were locked in endless, bloody conflicts. It was a time of suffering, survival, and struggle. In the historical narrative we've been told, this was the central story of the medieval world, a world defined by hardship and the relentless quest for power and land. But far from the ravaged lands of Europe, a different story was being written. A story of a civilization so rich, so sophisticated, and so powerful that it defies every image of the Middle Ages you've ever known. It was an empire built on gold, knowledge, and a ruler whose wealth was so vast, it was considered a force of nature. His name was Mansa Musa, and he was the Emperor of Mali. By some estimates, he was the wealthiest human being who has ever lived in all of history. His riches were beyond comprehension, and his empire was a hub of learning and commerce that stood apart from the struggling kingdoms of Europe. He built a kingdom of gold and intellectual light in a world steeped in shadows. So, who was this man whose name was known from the streets of Cairo to the markets of Baghdad, but whose story has been largely erased from Western history? And how did he build an empire that would become a legend of unimaginable wealth and power? To find the truth, we must travel back in time to the heart of West Africa, where a golden age was quietly flourishing. Before there was Mansa Musa, there was an empire. The story of Mali doesn't begin with a single man's wealth, but with a legendary figure who united a fractured land and set it on a path to glory. In the early 13th century, a prince named Sundiata Keita rose from humble beginnings to forge a new kingdom. He was a military genius who united the Mandinka tribes and created a formidable empire that would come to dominate West Africa. His story is the foundation upon which Mansa Musa's golden age would be built. The empire's strength was not just in its armies, but in its strategic location. The vast savanna and river systems of West Africa provided fertile ground for agriculture, but Mali's true power lay in its access to the most coveted resources of the medieval world: gold and salt. The empire sat at the crossroads of the trans-Saharan trade routes, a network of caravans that stretched from the markets of North Africa to the Sahara. For centuries, these routes had been channels for goods and ideas, but under Mali, they became a source of unimaginable wealth. Mali's empire was a logistical marvel. To the south, in the forests of the Gold Coast, lay the vast, untapped gold fields. To the north, in the heart of the Sahara, were the salt mines of Tagaza, where immense blocks of salt were carved from the earth. Gold and salt were the twin engines of the Mali economy, and the empire's genius lay in its control of these resources. Merchants traded gold for an equal weight in salt, a precious commodity in a world without refrigeration. The empire's kings grew wealthy by taxing this trade, and over time, the gold accumulated, building a royal treasury that was the envy of the known world. This wealth was managed by a highly organized political system. The empire was not just a collection of conquered lands. It was a sophisticated federation of kingdoms and provinces, each with a degree of autonomy but bound to the central authority of the Mansa, or emperor. This decentralized model allowed the empire to govern a vast territory, stretching across modern-day Mali, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea, and parts of Mauritania. It was a system that valued stability and commerce, a stark contrast to the constant warfare in Europe at the time. By the time Mansa Musa inherited the throne in the early 14th century, the Mali Empire was already a formidable power, but it was still a mystery to much of the world beyond North Africa. It was a kingdom of immense wealth that existed in a kind of splendid isolation. Its gold had reached the markets of Europe, but no one truly knew the scale of the power that controlled it. Mansa Musa was about to change all of that. He would embark on a journey that would not only reveal his empire to the world, but would create a legend that would echo through the centuries. By 1324, the Mali Empire was a prosperous and stable power. Yet, to much of the world, its ruler remained an enigma. The gold of Mali was a known commodity in the markets of Europe and the Middle East, but the source of its immense wealth was a tantalizing mystery. Mansa Musa was about to change that, not with a military campaign, but with an act of faith. As a devout Muslim, his one great ambition was to complete the Hajj, the pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca. It was a spiritual journey, but for the Emperor of Mali, it would become a historic event, a geopolitical statement, and a spectacle that would live on in legend. Mansa Musa's caravan was a sight unlike any the medieval world had ever seen. Its scale was monumental, a moving city of people and wealth stretching for miles across the Sahara. According to contemporary accounts from Arab historians like al-Umari and Ibn Khaldun, the procession included tens of thousands of people. It was a staggering logistical feat, a testament to the empire's power and organization. There were thousands of soldiers, officials, courtiers, and servants, but the most dazzling part of the procession was what they carried: gold. Hundreds, possibly thousands of camels were laden with gold. Each animal carried hundreds of pounds of the precious metal. It was an amount so vast that it almost defies comprehension. This was not a secret journey. Mansa Musa wanted the world to see the wealth of his empire. At every city he passed, from the oases of the Sahara to the crowded streets of Cairo, he and his entourage would spend freely and give away immense amounts of gold. When the caravan arrived in Cairo, the city's inhabitants were awestruck. Mansa Musa was received by the Mamluk Sultan, and for weeks, the city was flooded with Malian gold. The emperor and his people were incredibly generous, distributing gold to the poor and purchasing goods and services at prices that had never been seen before. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The gold market in Cairo was so destabilized by the influx that its value plummeted and would not recover for over a decade. Arab historians were flabbergasted, documenting this unprecedented event with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. For the first time, a black king from West Africa was not just a name on a trade map, but a living legend of unimaginable riches. The pilgrimage was also a journey of intellectual and spiritual exchange. In Mecca, Mansa Musa met with scholars and rulers from across the Islamic world. He demonstrated not only his material wealth, but also the depth of his learning and the piety of his faith. The journey was so successful that on his return trip, he brought back with him scholars, architects, and artists. These new minds and talents would transform his empire, helping to build new mosques and schools and further solidify Mali's reputation as a center of culture and learning. Mansa Musa's Hajj was the single most important act of public relations in the history of the Mali Empire. He had arrived a wealthy but unknown king from a distant land. He returned a global icon. He had put Mali on the map, not just as a source of gold, but as a sophisticated, powerful empire. His image would be immortalized on the Catalan Atlas of 1375, a European map that depicted him on a golden throne, holding a scepter and a gold nugget, cementing his place in the consciousness of a world that was just beginning to grasp the true scale of his wealth. When Mansa Musa returned from Mecca, he did not come back with only a legendary reputation. He brought with him a new vision for his empire, a commitment to transform his kingdom from a center of commerce into a beacon of intellectual light. His pilgrimage had connected Mali to the great minds of the Islamic world, and he returned with scholars, poets, and architects who were to build a new kind of empire. The city of Timbuktu, which had long been a major trading post for trans-Saharan caravans, was at the heart of this transformation. Mansa Musa invested vast amounts of his gold in turning it into a world-renowned center of scholarship. Under his patronage, the city flourished. The emperor commissioned the construction of magnificent mosques and, more importantly, universities. The most famous of these was the Sankore Madrasa, an institution that would become the spiritual and intellectual heart of Mali. This wasn't a small-scale school. At its peak, the Sankore Madrasa housed tens of thousands of students. It was an advanced university, teaching subjects as diverse as astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, medicine, law, and history. Scholars from across the continent and the Middle East flocked to Timbuktu, drawn by the city's reputation for intellectual freedom and the immense libraries that housed hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. These manuscripts were not only rare copies of the Quran, but also original works on science, history, and law, all meticulously written and preserved by Malian scholars. In an era when many European libraries contained only a few dozen books, Timbuktu's libraries were almost incomprehensibly vast. Mansa Musa's commitment to architecture was as profound as his dedication to learning. He brought back an Andalusian architect named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who designed the iconic Djinguereber Mosque in Timbuktu. This and other buildings were constructed using a unique and ingenious method of mud brick and wood, a style that became known as Sudano-Sahelian architecture. These structures were not only beautiful, but also marvels of engineering. They were built to withstand the harsh climate of the Sahara, and many of them, a testament to their builders' skill, still stand today. The construction of these grand mosques and learning centers served a dual purpose. They were places of worship and education, but they were also a powerful visual statement of the empire's wealth, faith, and sophistication. The legacy of this golden age was a Mali that was known not only as the source of the world's gold, but as a home for its greatest minds. When European maps began to feature Mansa Musa on his golden throne, they were not just charting a land of riches. They were charting a land of thinkers and builders, a place where knowledge was prized above all else. This cultural and intellectual flourishing would continue for generations, making the Mali Empire a powerhouse of both wealth and wisdom. Mansa Musa's reign was a brilliant but fleeting golden age. His death in 1337 marked the beginning of a long, slow decline for the Mali Empire. The stability and centralized power he had cultivated began to unravel under a series of weak and short-reigned successors. The very empire that was a marvel of governance and commerce began to struggle with the challenge of its own vast size. The internal struggles for power were the first crack in Mali's foundation. With no clear, strong hand at the helm, rival factions and regional governors began to assert their independence. The system that once allowed for a high degree of autonomy now became a source of fragmentation. The far-flung territories, which were once loyal outposts of a magnificent empire, began to drift away, each forming its own regional power. As Mali weakened from within, new rivals rose from its periphery. To the east, the Songhai Empire, centered around the trading city of Gao, was steadily growing in power. They were a formidable force, led by brilliant military commanders who would eventually challenge Mali's dominance over the critical trade routes. What had once been a single, powerful entity was now a chessboard for competing regional players, all vying for control of the same resources that had made Mali rich. Perhaps the most significant factor in Mali's decline was an external shift beyond its control. For centuries, the trans-Saharan trade had been the lifeblood of the empire, connecting its gold fields to the markets of the Mediterranean. But by the late 15th century, European explorers, led by the Portuguese, were charting new sea routes along the coast of West Africa. This development, which we now know as the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade and colonialism, fundamentally altered global commerce. The flow of goods and wealth no longer needed to pass through the Sahara. The new sea routes were faster, more efficient, and were increasingly controlled by European powers. The gold that had once flowed north through the desert now began to flow directly west, bypassing the Mali Empire entirely. This shift in trade routes was a fatal blow to an empire whose power was built on controlling land-based commerce. The revenue from taxing the trade caravans dwindled, and with it, the empire's wealth and authority. One by one, the great cities fell. Timbuktu, once the undisputed jewel of scholarship and learning, was besieged and captured by the Songhai. The great libraries were ransacked, and the flow of knowledge began to slow to a trickle. The once mighty Mali Empire was reduced to a small regional kingdom, a mere shadow of its former glory. The golden age of Mansa Musa had come to an end. But the end of the empire did not mean the end of its story. The incredible legacy it left behind would be a testament to a civilization that defied its own fading light, a testament that has been hidden for centuries. The end of the Mali Empire was a tragic conclusion to a golden age, but the story's final act was not one of military defeat. It was a quieter, more insidious kind of war, a war on memory itself. For centuries, the image of Mansa Musa on his golden throne had appeared on European maps, a testament to his wealth and power. But as the world changed, the story of the Golden King began to fade. It was not simply forgotten, it was deliberately pushed into the shadows. The primary force behind this historical erasure was the rise of new global powers and a new form of commerce. As the Portuguese and other European nations established sea trade routes along the African coast, the trans-Saharan routes that had made Mali rich lost their importance. This shift in commerce was followed by a more profound shift in ideology. The burgeoning transatlantic slave trade created a political and economic incentive to portray Africa not as a continent of powerful empires, but as a primitive land of chaos and savagery. A new narrative was required to justify the enslavement of millions of Africans. The story of a fabulously wealthy and intellectually advanced Mali Empire did not fit this new worldview. A history that spoke of African kings who ruled with sophistication and wisdom was inconvenient and dangerous. So the maps were redrawn, not just geographically, but historically. The golden throne of Mansa Musa disappeared from European atlases. The wealth of the Mali Empire was dismissed as a myth or an exaggeration. The libraries of Timbuktu were treated as dusty relics, rather than the intellectual centers of their time. This act of historical amnesia created a profound and lasting distortion. By the time of the European colonization of Africa, the narrative of African inferiority was so deeply ingrained that the idea of a thriving, powerful medieval empire was seen as ludicrous. The very existence of Mansa Musa, a figure documented by contemporary scholars and cartographers, became an inconvenient truth to be ignored or dismissed. The memory of Mali's intellectual and cultural achievements was replaced by a false history of a continent without history. This erasure of a golden age served a clear purpose. It allowed colonial powers to claim a moral high ground, to justify their conquests and exploitation by framing them as civilizing missions. But the truth, though buried, was not entirely gone. It lay in the oral traditions of the Malian people, in the surviving manuscripts of Timbuktu, and in the grand architecture that still stands against the desert winds. The story of Mansa Musa, the Golden Kin. The history of Mansa Musa and his Golden Empire was buried for centuries, a deliberate act of historical erasure. But a story so grand, so rich in golden knowledge, cannot be entirely silenced. The legacy of Mali survived, woven into the very fabric of West Africa and echoing in the modern world. We can see it today in the magnificent mud brick architecture of Djenné, a testament to the skill of the empire's builders. We can hear it in the oral traditions of the Malian people, who have kept these stories alive for generations. The enduring impact of this empire challenges our understanding of the world. It proves that during Europe's so-called Dark Ages, powerful, sophisticated civilizations were thriving in Africa. It shows that immense wealth and intellectual achievement were not confined to the European continent, and that a single king from West Africa could be the most powerful and influential man on earth. The story of Mansa Musa is not just a forgotten chapter in African history. It is a vital part of global history. It is a powerful reminder that history is often told by the victors, and that the most important truths are often the ones that have been hidden. And yet, fragments of this history survived. The surviving manuscripts of Timbuktu are a living library of Mali's intellectual greatness, containing ancient works on astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. They are a direct refutation of the colonial narrative that Africa was a continent without its own written history. They are a powerful tool for a new generation of historians and students who are searching for a more complete and truthful version of the past. The story of Mansa Musa is a story of resilience. It is a testament to a people who built an empire of gold and wisdom in a time of global ignorance. It is a narrative that proves greatness can emerge from anywhere, and that the pursuit of knowledge is a universal and timeless endeavor. The echoes of Mansa Musa's golden age still resonate today, a powerful and inspiring reminder of a legacy that was too grand to be erased. So there you have it, the true story of Mansa Musa, the Golden King. We've explored the humble beginnings of his empire, the legendary pilgrimage that changed the world, the golden age of learning and architecture that followed, and the tragic circumstances that led to his story's erasure. We've shown how this single, remarkable figure challenges and reshapes our understanding of the medieval world. Now, the question is, what happens next? This story is only one of countless others that have been lost to time. We believe that history should not be hidden, and that every voice, every empire, and every story deserves to be heard. We want to continue this journey of discovery with you. If you were as captivated by Mansa Musa's story as we are, we encourage you to join our community. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell to be notified of our next video. We are already investigating the next untold story, and we want you to be a part of it. What other historical figures do you think deserve to be brought into the light? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's unearth the truth together.